I called loudly. Finally he turned his head, stood up and trotted towards me, wagging his tail, a big doggy smile on his face. "He's deaf, Mom," I said when I walked into the kitchen. That was why he led Grandpa into the path of that vehicle. He couldn't hear it approaching. So when the girl shouted and called him, he still was not reacting. Anyhow, at the end, he just turned his head and he looked at the girl. And when he saw the girl, he felt very happy and he started wagging his tail. And this was when Rita understood that the dog, which means Simon had a problem, and the problem which he had was that he was deaf. He was deaf meaning he was unable to hear. Now because he was unable to hear, he could not hear the car coming, and that is why the grandfather met with an accident. Ma stopped cooking and thought for a minute. "He must be almost 10 years old now," she said, wiping her hands on a cloth. "So it's possible his hearing is going." Simon still wasn't eating, and the next morning when I took him for a walk, his legs gave way and he sat down heavily on the grass. "Mama," I shouted as I tried to lift him up. "Come quick, Simon can't walk." Now listening to this, when Rita told her mother that I think Simon is deaf, the mother stopped cooking and she went to the dog to see what the dog was. And then when she realized that the dog was about 10 years old. Now for the ones who do not know, dogs, they do not have a very long life. So he was almost 10 years old and he had become very old and he was becoming weak. So Simon, he still didn't eat his food. He was not behaving properly. He was not eating. He was just sulking and just walking around. So the next morning when Rita and the dog went out for a walk, Simon just went flat onto the ground. He could not walk anymore because his legs were giving him problem. Ma helped me pick Simon up and we took him to the vet. Simon was running a fever and he was severely dehydrated. So he was put on a drip immediately. I stayed with him until he was settled, and for the next few days spent as much time as I could with him as he fought for his life. Now listening to the commotion when the daughter, that is when Rita called her mother, the mother ran, lifted up Simon and took him to the vet. Now a vet is a doctor who treats animals. A vet is a doctor that treats animals. So when they took him to the doctor said that Simon is running a fever and he is dehydrated. Dehydrated meaning lack of water in the body. When people do not drink a lot of water, then they start getting dehydrated. So immediately the doctor put him on drip. A drip is that saline that we put onto our body. And that day, actually for that entire night, Rita stayed with the dog and was just there to support the dog because the dog was fighting for its life. It was a week before I could visit Grandpa again. He looked so frail and weak and he was bandaged all over. He looked at me as I held his hand and whispered, "Get me out of here, how is Simon?" I found it hard to speak about Simon, but he seemed to read my mind. It will do him good to meet me. He must feel like I've deserted him. Then Grandpa told me how much he longed to be home. Now he hated being in the hospital. So Rita, she was unable to meet her grandfather for a complete 1 week. So after 1 week, that when Rita went to meet her grandfather, she noticed that her grandfather was very weak and very frail, very tired, and he had bandage all over his body. But the grandfather did not worry about himself, because as soon as Rita came, the grandfather asked about Simon. He asked that, "Tell me, how is Simon?" Now Rita also found it very difficult to talk about Simon, because even Simon was in the same condition. So she was unable to say anything to the grandfather, but the grandfather, because he was aged and he was elderly, he could read the expression on Rita's face, and he said that, see, you take me to Simon, it will be good for him. If he sees me, he will become okay. It took Ma 2 weeks to convince the doctors to let Grandpa come home with us. But then by then Simon was back at home. When he realized that Grandpa was back too, Simon rose shakily to his feet and began to bark. Now it took a complete 2 weeks for the mother to convince the doctors that the grandfather would be taken care of at home better. So anyhow, the doctors agreed, and Simon was the grandfather was taken home. And by the same time, even the dog was taken home. And when the grandfather came home, and when the dog realized that the grandfather was at the same place, meaning he was also at home, he rose shakily because he was very old and very tired, and he started barking. Now he was not barking because he was angry, but he started barking because he was very happy. Began to bark, almost trying to dance around, getting around our feet as we helped Grandpa get into his chair. The attendant who brought Grandpa from the hospital told me, keep the dog away, he'll jump on the old man and hurt him. But Grandpa put up his hand and said hoarsely, Simon is too smart to do that. So the nurse or the ward boy from the hospital who helped in bringing the grandfather home, that ward boy told the mother and told Rita that keep the dog away from the grandfather because the dog would jump on the grandfather and would hurt the grandfather even more. But out here the grandfather replies that Simon is too smart to do that type of thing. There were only a few days left before Christmas, and we had to look after 2 patients in the house now. As we finished our preparation, but as the days passed, both made a slow, steady recovery. On Christmas Eve, I found Grandpa clicking on his mobile phone. Now, in that house, there were 2 patients. The first patient was the grandfather who had met with an accident, and the second patient was Simon, who was old and weak. Now, they had to take care of both the patients, and there was just a few days left for Christmas. So after doing all the preparations and after getting everything ready, on Christmas Eve, that is on the 24th night, that is 24th of December, the night of 24th of December, Rita noticed that her grandfather was playing with the mobile phone. I thought we were pals. Why didn't you tell me how ill Simon was? Grandpa had obviously been checking with the vet as well as talking to Ma. So out here the grandfather was very angry, not exactly angry, but he was, what do you say for that? He was annoyed. He was annoyed with the mother because he thought that the mother and Rita would tell him everything, would tell him about how serious the dog was, would tell him about that Simon was not eating properly, but all these things were not told to the grandfather, and there was a reason why these were not told to the grandfather, was because the grandfather himself was admitted in a hospital. I didn't say anything. The next morning, after picking up the presents from below the hastily decorated Christmas tree, I found Grandpa's bed empty and Simon nowhere in sight. I was rushing out of the room to inform Ma when Grandpa walked in unsteadily from the veranda led by Simon. So the next morning, which was the 25th of December, Rita woke up and she went down to the Christmas tree to see what she had got for her Christmas presents. But when she went down, she noticed that Grandfather was not in his room and Simon was nowhere to be found. So very hastily, Rita ran out of the house, and at that time, the grandfather was coming in and he was following Simon, which means that Simon was leading the grandfather into the house. Grandpa, you're able to walk again, I exclaimed. How did you do it? I needed to get strong again for Simon. Simon says he's not ready to go yet. Grandpa, you are playing Simon Says again, I said happily. So out here, when they came in, Rita got felt very happy because she saw that her grandfather was able to walk. And then she said that, "Oh, I'm very happy to see that you are able to walk." And then the grandfather replies that, "I am walking because Simon says that he does not want to die now. So because he does not want to die now, that is why I have to be strong. And if I am strong, then only will he be strong and he will be able to live." So this was the story that was Simon Says, which was a type of a game, exactly, which the grandfather used to play when he was young. And because of that game, he was able to save his life as well as the life of the dog. So I do hope that you'll have understood this chapter. I will be back with the next, which is a poem, and the name of the poem is A View of a Cat. So thank you for your time. Have a lovely day.